Welcome to Canadian Justice. I'm Christine Van Gyn. It's a new year, and I wanted to spend some time talking to the leaders of some of my favorite legal charities and organizations about what they did in 2022 and what they are looking forward to in 2023. Today's guest is the National Director of the Runnymede Society, Kris Kinsinger. Now, Runnymede is a project of the Canadian Constitution Foundation, which is the legal charity I work for, and they play a unique and fascinating role in the development of Canada's legal culture. I am so excited for this conversation about what the Runnymede Society is and what they want to achieve. Kris, thanks so much for joining me today. I'm just thrilled to be having this conversation. Let's start from the basics. What is the Runnymede Society, and maybe why is it called that? Because it's not named after a street in Toronto.
No, it's absolutely not. It's not named after the subway station either. So the Runnymede Society, Christine, is a national organization in Canada that is made up of law students and lawyers and professors who share an underlying commitment to the principles of constitutionalism, the rule of law, and fundamental freedoms. Runnymede was first started in 2016, primarily as a student organization. But since that time, it has grown, and we have had lawyers join our ranks, and as I said, law professors, to the point where we now have chapters throughout the country. We have 19 student chapters and 7 lawyer chapters, and those numbers are just growing. As to why it's called Runnymede, it's named after the fields of Runnymede in England, which is where famously King John was forced to sign Magna Carta, which really begins the history of English constitutionalism and British constitutionalism. And of course, that has fed into the development of Canadian constitutionalism, because in Canada, we have a constitution that is similar in principle to that of the United Kingdom.
Such an important piece of history
Absolutely.
and the development of Western civilization as we know it, that I think a lot of people miss out on when they hear the name of the organization. It's so important. Now, the principles that you talked about, constitutionalism, fundamental freedoms, and the rule of law, can you maybe just speak briefly about what some of those terms mean?
Well, the rule of law is really kind of the starting point. And again, when we go back to Magna Carta, this really marks the beginning of the rule of law, because with Magna Carta, the powers of the king in England were circumscribed. And really at its core, that's what the rule of law stands for. It stands against the exercise of arbitrary authority, and it states that those in authority have to govern in accordance with the law. Constitutionalism is sort of an outflow of that, and it states that that the institutions of the state have to be governed in accordance with the principles and the provisions that are laid out in the Constitution. And of course, some of those principles and provisions are fundamental freedoms. They're guaranteed in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms under Section 2, but they predate the Charter as well, Christine.
Yeah.
And they go back to the very nature of the institutions that we have, of having parliamentary governance and all of these things. You can't have parliamentary democracy without the fundamental freedoms. And so that's what Runnymede really does, is it creates a network of people who recognize the importance of these as commitments that underlie our Constitution and want to ensure that we remain committed to them in the legal academy and profession.
So you talk about Runnymede as sort of originating as a student organization. It's obviously expanded beyond that now. But why is it so important to emphasize those ideals, constitutionalism, fundamental freedoms, and the rule of law in law schools? Have law schools maybe been de-emphasizing those ideals as part of legal education? And what role do you see Runnymede playing in bringing this to the forefront of imagination for law students?
I think any institution is always at risk of becoming an echo chamber. And certainly you can look at any kind of, the legal academy is no different, where there is certain received wisdom, and that's been accepted. But it's good, Christine, to ensure that we are promoting intellectual diversity. And that's another big part of Runnymede's mandate, is to go into the law schools and to make sure that we are having conversations about these issues in a way that is genuinely intellectually diverse, that doesn't create echo chambers or create an alternate silo, but that brings people together from across the spectrum to discuss these principles. Because ultimately, these are things that history has shown can be taken for granted. And we continue to at times see them play out in our public discourse, that these principles are taken for granted, such as, for example, last year with the Freedom Convoy, where we saw a breakdown of law and order in Ottawa, followed by the invocation of the Emergencies Act, which many think was unjustified and did not meet the legal standards laid out in that act.
A position I absolutely share, and we share at the Canadian Constitution Foundation, since we are, after all, challenging the invocation of the Emergencies Act in federal court. And we also participated in the inquiry looking into whether or not the invocation of that law was justified. So important. We've got to go to commercial break now, but we will be right back.